So it pops up in the comment section occasionally, or emails that I get from other sources. Steve, what do these audiophile words mean? What is transparency? What is soundstage? What is fat bass? Well, I'm going to attempt right now to explain all these things because, well, you know, my job is describing sound with words, and I do it all the time, but whether it's the message is received is another story, right? So let's see how this all works out. Now I'm going to start with probably the most used and most overused word in the lexicon, and that is transparency. I'm going to start with one of the hardest because it is the most baffling to even to people who are in the deep end of this pool of audiophilia. My definition of transparency is that the sound is first clear. That's good, right? Very vivid, very clear, very real. But I think the deeper way of describing transparency that I like to use is that you're hearing into the recording. You feel like you're hearing back through time to the original event at the recording session, and all of the gear and the microphones at the front end, the microphones and the mixers and the processing, all that stuff has disappeared, and now what happened at the recording session is being transposed and communicated to you via your stereo speakers. It is as if, not literally that it's happening, but you're getting closer to that feeling that this is really a portal. Your system is a portal back to the original event, and all that gear at the front end and all your gear in your system has disappeared, and you're just hearing the music as it was. It's a relative term. Some systems are far more transparent than others, but even ones that have a little bit of it can be pretty exciting to get that sense of realism. Maybe a better word would be just realism, that the music is right there. Okay, I think we got it. Can we agree? We got the transparency thing out of the way? Cool. Now, the next one is soundstage. But I think soundstage is a fancier word than stereo imaging. But I think stereo imaging, to me, the sound coming out of two speakers, well, the miracle of stereo imaging is that you don't just hear sound from the left and sound from the right. You hear sound from the left and right, and in between you hear the vocalist usually right between the left and right speakers, and then you hear instruments sprayed out or arrayed between the two speakers, and sometimes even beyond a little bit between the speakers. And that's a stereo image, that the tambourine is on the left, and then there's a trombone a little further in, and then there's a marimba, and then there's the singer in the center, and then there's an acoustic bass, and then there's drums, and they're sort of laid out in front of you that way. That's stereo imaging. But soundstage is a more three-dimensional stereo image. Instead of it just being a line of instruments and vocalists between left and right speakers, they occupy depth, that the sound can go recede behind the plane of the speakers and also come forward ahead of the speakers. Because after all, the instruments, assuming they were all playing together live, weren't in a straight line. Some of them were, the drums may have been further back and the singer might have been further forward, and et cetera, et cetera. And you can, when a system does a great soundstage, you can almost feel like you can hear around the instruments, that each one is occupying its own space in the soundstage. That's really good. Now that's something that, you'd have to have a pretty damn good system playing a really good recording for that to happen. Now a lot of, a little divergence here, is that if the recording, as many modern recordings are, multiple mono images or individual instruments, that the singer wasn't actually with the band, the singer was in a booth, and the drums weren't actually played at the same time as the band, or they were in a separate room like a little drum booth. But the illusion that everybody's all together and has these spatial relationships to each other within the soundstage, that can be faked pretty well. So you may not be able to tell the difference whether it was really real, that all the band was laid out together in one big studio space, or whether or not they weren't. That's for another time to get into that. But basically, Soundstage is a three-dimensional stereo image. Sometimes, actually, speaking of 3 dimensions, sometimes there's the illusion of height, that some instruments seem higher in the soundstage. Again, it's got to be in the recording itself. It has to be a pretty damn good recording, and it has to also be played over well-placed, really good speakers to get that extra dimension of height. Then we get to this one came up recently, and someone said I described bass as sounding thick. I think that's descriptive, but thick bass is just bass that has this weight that's beyond the sound of an actual bass instrument. It's very massive and heavy and deep. And thick is not exactly, I guess depending on where you're coming from, a good thing. Right? Thick may be thick as in a bit heavy and not terribly nimble, right? It's lacking finesse and pitch definition, because a lot of speakers that create a lot of bass, their bass definition, the actual ability to hear each bass note, let's say it's being played by an electric or an acoustic bass, it can get kind of muddled. That's another audio word. It can be muddy or muddy. So you can't hear the notes, you can just hear that there's this heaviness, this weight to the music. So thick, muddy, boomy, bloated, those are all ways of describing very overdone bass. Of course, the opposite of that is underdone bass, where the bass is too thin, too lightweight. There's not enough weight to the bass. It's lacking in any kind of weight or body or depth, or the sense of it going down to the lowest bass frequencies that were hopefully in the original recording. So if the bass is thin, it's just not satisfying. You feel like you're missing something when the bass is too thin. And then we get to transients now, or vivid or fast. I sometimes use those words interchangeably. And transients are the high frequency component of, let's say, the drummer whacks on a cymbal. So there's the original crash of the stick against the cymbal, but then there's all these harmonics and details and sparkle that come from the cymbal or a percussion instrument or a trumpet or something. There are these high frequency components and harmonics that should sound fast and alive, and that they should seem to even float above the actual sound of the cymbal. But it has a tactile quality to it that you can almost reach out and touch in this case, like the cymbal, or if it's a trumpet. Now, trumpets are, I went to school to be a recording engineer in let's say the late 1970s, and I remember one of the teachers talking about how difficult it was to record a trumpet, because trumpets have a lot of high frequency transients in them. So even when the ear doesn't detect all of them, you wind up recording trumpets at a lower level than you would expect, because you might, in this case of the analog days, oversaturate the tape. But that bite of the brass, that's an example. If you hear unamplified acoustic trumpet, that has a very, very, very distinctive, transient, rich sound. And yes, cymbals and other percussion instruments and pianos, which is a percussion instrument, they all have that sense of speed and transient richness that I'm looking for in the reproduction of speakers or headphones or amplifiers. Not all amplifiers can do that as well. So I think I've come to the end of my list. So what I've left out, or if you don't think that those explanations are satisfactory, or if I've left something out, please put the comments in there of ask your questions, and I will endeavor to clarify the meaning of audiophile words. Is there anything else I should talk about? There is another one, and the other one is one that my friend Herb Reichert likes to use, and that's tone. And tone, and I've asked Herb to give me his definition. He always kind of weasels out. He never really gives me a good answer. Maybe he will in the comments below. But tone is tonality. It's the sense of naturalness of the sound. Does that harmonica sound right? Or is it too thin? Or is it too bright? Or is it too this or too that? Is that piano's tone enough like the sound of a piano? Felt-covered hammers hitting steel strings. Does it have that tone character? That's what tone refers to. And of course, with human voices, something we are intimately familiar with that aren't amplified. Does the singer's voice, again, in a well-recorded piece of music, does the singer's voice sound human? Is there a body attached to that voice, or does it just sound like it's coming from the neck up? If it doesn't have any of those things, it's not going to be tonally correct. Anyway, I think I'm now actually done. My name is Steve Guttenberg. This is the Audiophiliac Daily Show, which has a habit of coming up kind of daily. And you can follow me, I've gotten this far, you can follow me at Audiophiliac Man on Twitter. And I would love it if you would subscribe to this YouTube channel and share these videos, like these videos, give them a thumbs up if you like them. And the other thing you can do is check out my Patreon page, which can be found at patreon.com/audiophiliac. And I'll thank you in advance for doing that. See you next time.